This is Atomic Biscuits, and I'm your host, BACFA. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Atomic Biscuits. This is 2024-11-17 Assembly. Start out over at semaphore.com. COP29 opens with lowered expectations for major agreements. My question immediately is, why is America being fleeced for fake green agenda? Otherwise, why aren't the world's economies each driving their own transition? Maybe we should ask Germany what happens when there's no more gas for the engine of an industrial empire. Anyway, there's more to find over here in this article, which reads, the COP29 climate conference opened in Azerbaijan on Monday, aiming to establish a new climate financing target that involves thrashing out how much developed nations should pay developing ones to adapt to climate change. The annual summit faces multiple challenges this year. Many G7 leaders have dropped out of attending, including U.S. resident Joe Biden and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, while several reports have surfaced that appear to show COP29's chief executive touting the potential for fossil fuel deals during the talks. On Monday, the UN warned 2024 will be the hottest year on record. Last week's U.S. elections dented hopes for those looking to the country, the second greatest producer of carbon emissions after China, to set the example at the COP summit. The new president-elect Donald Trump is a known climate skeptic, withdrawing the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord during his last presidency. Washington rejoined in 2021 under the current president, Joe Biden. One expert from the Center of European Reform told The Independent that reduced U.S. support could demotivate developing countries from taking seriously the climate ambitions of the West. Only two of the G7's leaders, the British and Italian prime ministers, would attend in Baku this week, generating fears the rich nations are losing political will to tackle climate change, the National wrote. The Chinese will play an outsized role in this year's summit, its confidence boosted by Beijing's dominance of the clean tech industry as the West's attention lies elsewhere. Chinese diplomats will say the country is beating its decarbonization targets and helping the developing world to do the same, while Europe and the U.S. lag behind. China's dominance as a leader in green energy technology and climate diplomacy makes a significant change following years of pressure from Western governments. One Chinese analyst told the Financial Times that the West linking climate policies to trade is making climate diplomacy more politicized, more divisive, and that instead Beijing has chosen to view its climate agenda as not a political story, but a real economy story. One expert from the Asia Society Policy Institute told the outlet. So, as usual, it's just a bunch of bunk going on over there at COP29 and an effort to fleece Western societies of their value. There's a short but interesting article over at theblaze.com. J.D. Vance as Vice President and Senate Majority Leader simultaneously. Charlie Kirk says it just might work. Now that the Republicans have officially taken control of the Senate, the question is, who will the party select as the next Senate Majority Leader? Founder of Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk, told Glenn Beck who he thinks might be perfect for the job. Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. John Adams presided over the U.S. Senate as Senate Majority Leader 200 years ago as Vice President of the United States. I think J.D. Vance should be President of the Senate and become Senate Majority Leader, Kirk declared. I am in love with that, Glenn said, adding that J.D. would be fantastic in that role. Senator Mike Lee came up with this. This is a 1 a.m. phone call from Senator Mike Lee last night, and he had me at hello, said Kirk. Now, mind you, JD would have to really want it in the sense that it would be a ton of monotonous. You have to sit in the chair and listen to procedure stuff, and he'd have to go to the Senate lunches. However, he would basically be able to be the president of the Senate and set the entire tone of the legislative agenda, he added. If Vance were open to the role, Kirk said he would likely be handed the Senate leadership funds and he would get to determine who's on committees. There's a lot of power in that, he told Glenn. This would completely change the game in Washington. Even though the Constitution names the Vice President of the United States as the President of the Senate, this power has never been exercised, tried, or tested. Could that change now that Donald Trump is returning to the White House? That's the question posed over at Glenn Beck's Twitter account. There's a link here to a video. You can watch the whole story. It's posted over at theblaze.com. I don't think they're likely to do that. I think JD needs to be the VP and focus on that stuff. These jobs are bigger than one person already. So, but I think it's an interesting thought and experiment about what does the Constitution actually say and what is the function. I do think that we need to revisit whether or not senators should be at large voted in or appointed by the states again, that there was some power for the states in their voices in the Senate once upon a time, and that's no longer there. This story comes from Newser.com. Stephen Miller lands his job in the White House. You can get this link and all the links for the stories that I share on Atomic Biscuits at my account on Gab at BACFA. Trump appoints longtime advisor as his deputy chief of policy. Donald Trump is naming longtime advisor Stephen Miller, an immigration hardliner, to be the deputy chief of policy in his new administration, reports the Associated Press. Vice President-elect J.D. Vance posted a message of congratulations on Monday to Miller on X and said, "This is another fantastic pick by the president." Miller was a senior advisor in Trump's first term and has been a central figure in many of his policy decisions, notably his move to separate thousands of immigrant families as a deterrence program in 2018. Miller helped craft many of Trump's hardline speeches and plans on immigration, as CNN reports. Miller has said that a second Trump term would see 10 times as many deportations, to the tune of more than 1 million per year. This short article shows you just how quickly someone can turn a story into a slang. The thing is, this business about separating families is bunk. What you will discover upon deeper look into the immigration of that time is that there were children being brought across the border, and there are still today, who don't belong to the adults who come with them. They began doing DNA tests to prove as much because they started to see some of the same kids coming across over and over and over. And so special treatment was being given to families versus individuals coming across. These sort of little side snippets and repeats of things that aren't true is how the mainstream media continues to punch in ways that just aren't fair. This is why they're the enemy of the people. Just weeks ago, we heard that there was no such thing as a border czar from Kamala Harris, that it was just a right-wing talking point, but no, it's an actual title that they came up with to indicate someone who's in charge of the borders. President-elect Trump names Tom Homan border czar. This is from redstate.com. President-elect Donald Trump has named former acting ICE director, and that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that's ICE, and Trump campaign surrogate Tom Homan as his border czar. I'm pleased to announce that the former ICE director and stalwart on border control, Tom Homan, will be joining the Trump administration in charge of our nation's borders, the border czar, including, but not limited to, the southern border, the northern border, all maritime and aviation security. I've known Tom for a long time, and there is nobody better at policing and controlling our borders. Likewise, Tom Homan will be in charge of all deportation of illegal aliens back to their country of origin. Congratulations to Tom. I have no doubt he will do a fantastic and long awaited for job. This is Trump's second cabinet appointment as the campaign transition team is working to vet other key Oval Office and staff positions. On Thursday, Trump named his campaign manager Susie Wiles as White House Chief of Staff. As ICE acting director under the first Trump administration, Homan verbally bodied Representative Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington, who tried to lecture him on illegal immigrant detention facilities when Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, tried to turn her fake compassion and outrage over illegals on Homan. He silenced her with his fact-based, no-nonsense approach to law enforcement and the rule of law. After leaving the first Trump administration, Homan remained a staunch critic of the Biden-Harris administration and their disastrous response to the crisis on the southern border. A week before the 2024 election, Homan laid out for CBS's 60 Minutes how Trump would enact his promise that on day one, he would launch a mass deportation of illegal aliens. The clip went viral and caused the legacy media and the left to clutch pearls and fall on fainting couches. CBS correspondent Cecilia Vega asked, "Is there a way to carry out mass deportation without separating families?" Homan responded, "Of course there is," and paused for effect. "Families can be deported together." Homan is a no-nonsense, matter-of-fact, and most important, action-oriented, exactly what Americans expect and need in a border czar. No hunting for root causes, and Homan looks like he enjoys rare steaks over word salads. Anyway, love, I love some of these memes, the red lit eyes, breaking Tom Homan border czar over there from Jack Poso. Anyway, you can find more of this good stuff and links to videos that back up this thing at redstates.com. They've told the Biden administration to retain all the paperwork because nobody believes the books. I think that there is this sense of, are they just that inept or are they evil? And sometimes things happen that just really make you wonder who's really running the show. Over at One America News, OANN.com, they ran this story. Mattel company deeply regrets wicked doll packaging misprint that directed children to porn site. Now, this is toys that are meant to be supportive of the new movie version of the musical Wicked. And, I've always had a problem with the way that modern fiction takes bad guys and somehow makes them relatable. And Disney spent, a decade and a half turning the, live evil into a popular thing. That it's just a life choice, It's just a different way of living. It's not the good, it's the evil. And that's just as valid as anything. It's the craziest thing. It used to be that we taught kids right from wrong, and now we give them choices that allow them to be evil. Why would we do that? Well, it's because the people who are making these decisions probably don't have children and would love to corrupt them. Truly. Anyway, the story reads, following complaints regarding how an inappropriate accidental misspelling on their new doll packaging directed young consumers to a pornographic website, toy manufacturer Mattel has apologized for the misprint. The doll was inspired by the new 2024 Wicked movie. Mattel recently released the new singing dolls ahead of the long-awaited film. However, social media posts showed that the packaging displayed a pornography website on it rather than the movie's true web address. The company maintained that they had intended to direct consumers to their website, which uses a similarly worded URL to promote the new film. Fans who bought the doll posted about the discovery on social media platforms. I purchased the singing Elphaba doll upon inspection. The website printed on the back side of the Mattel box, right above the barcode, is listed as an unaffiliated adult, not safe for work, 18 plus website, one person posted on Reddit. Anyone else seeing this? In another post, a woman said, "Went to Target and Walmart today, and yeah, the Wicked dolls have the porn website listed." The official Mattel Wicked dolls link to a porn site on the box. And there's a picture linked here from a post, Just Too Good, on Twitter. The company released an apology for the unfortunate error and advised parents that the misprinted website is not appropriate for children. Quote, "We deeply regret this unfortunate error and are taking immediate action to remedy this," Mattel announced. Consumers who already have the product are advised to discard the product packaging or obscure the link and may contact Mattel customer service for further information. Now, don't you know collectors are snapping these up as fast as they can? Of course they are. Additionally, online users have pointed out that the URL listed takes users to a webpage that displays porno movies by Stormy Daniels, the former porn star who alleged wrongdoing in Donald Trump's so-called hush money case. Her LinkedIn states that she is a director, writer, producer at Wicked Pictures. Welcome to Wicked Pictures. Watch over 25 years of award-winning porn movies and parody porn films in 4K HD and check out videos directed by Stormy Daniels, the website's description reads. Sure, it was just an accident. I don't know, Halloween 3 comes to mind really fast. Most mainstream media outlets are flailing and failing, but there are going to be some that people glom onto because they cannot accept the way the world is now. I think we're going to see more from places like Fox and Vanity Fair and Teen Vogue. They'll hold on to their Condé Nast benefactors who are going to pump out more propaganda through small minds as they can. This one from Vox just made me think that somebody is just that barking sound that you hear out in the wilderness. That's what this is. Trump's tariffs could tank the economy. Will the Supreme Court stop them? Clickbait much? President-elect Trump is his own worst enemy unless his fellow Republicans on the Supreme Court intervene. After winning the 2024 election, in part due to high inflation early in President Joe Biden's term, President-elect Donald Trump wants to enact policies that would lead to the very same kind of inflation that doomed Democrats. Though Trump inherits a strong economy and low inflation, that's if you believe the books, he's proposed a 10 to 20% tariff on all imports and a 60% tariff on all imports from China. The Budget Lab at Yale estimates that this policy alone could raise consumer prices by as much as 5.1% and could diminish U.S. economic growth by up to 1.4%. An analysis by the think tank Peterson Institute for International Economics finds that Trump's tariffs, when combined with some of his other proposals, such as mass deportation, would lead to inflation rising between 6 and 9.3%. Now, I just have to stop because these people are supposed to be the learned ones, right? Shouldn't they understand some basics about supply and demand and how economy works? By placing tariffs in the way, people are not going to buy those more expensive things because people do what's in their own best self-interest. They're going to buy the cheap stuff, which is how China got such a toehold in the first place. They're not playing with fair economic principles. They're subsidizing their prices with slavery. So if we put the blockade up and we must produce it locally, then that drives up what? Jobs here in the States. I mean, this is not, these are, this is like hydraulics in the machine of the world. You push here and it pulls there. These things have cause and effect. The fact that they want to pontificate about these prognostications is silly because up to 1.4%, or it could cause us to grow like it did before under his policies. Are they even looking at history? No, they're trying to throw dirt up in your face. They're trying to put sugar in the tank on their way out of the car. The article continues. If Trump pushes through his proposed tariffs, they will undoubtedly be challenged in court, and most likely in the Supreme Court. There are no shortages of businesses that might be hurt financially by these tariffs, and any one of them could file a lawsuit. Well, sure they could. They also could source their cheap crap, Walmart, I'm looking at you, from American manufacturing. Also, I just was thinking about this uh, deportation. How is that going to cause inflation? You deport people, guess what? The cost of rentals will go down. Anyway, that raises a difficult question. Will the Supreme Court permit Trump to enact policies that could sabotage his presidency, and with it, the Republican Party's hopes of a political realignment that could doom Democrats to the wilderness? Okay. If you're a Democrat and your enemy is destroying himself, wouldn't you let him do it? I mean, why are they concerned about Trump's presidency being sabotaging? It just it defies logic. By the way, 43 lab monkeys escaped in South Carolina. They have a legal claim to freedom. I think that there is a terrible movie that starts with monkeys getting freed from a lab. Um, yeah. The legal arguments in favor of allowing Trump to unilaterally impose high tariffs are surprisingly strong. Several federal laws give the president exceedingly broad power to impose tariffs, and the limits imposed by these statutes are quite vague. A presidential proclamation imposing such tariffs wouldn't be unprecedented. In 1971, President Richard Nixon imposed a 10% tariff on nearly all foreign goods, which a federal appeals court upheld. Congress has since amended some of the laws Nixon relied on, but a key provision allowing the president to regulate importation of any property in which any foreign country or any national thereof has had any interest remains on the books. I will tell you that having spent some time in Australia, which has very steep taxes and tariffs on imports, or at least it did when I was there. Like there was a 100% tax on bringing a car into the country, manufactured abroad. So Japan is quite close, but by the time you double the price, then it made the locally built Holdens and other cars in Australia more competitive. That actually propped up a lot of their internal manufacturing and pleased the labor unions. So this is the other thing that's unspoken here is this really makes a play to some blue collar people that the Democrats can't compete with. The judiciary does have one way it might constrain Trump's tariffs. The Supreme Court's Republican majority has given itself an unchecked veto power over any policy decision by the executive branch that those justices deem to be too ambitious. In Biden versus Nebraska 2023, for example, the Republican justices struck down the Biden administration's primary student loans forgiveness program, despite the fact that the program is unambiguously authorized by a federal statute. Sorry. Again, the money is meant to be dealt by the House in our system. And you can't just decide to reallocate funds from one thing to another. And that's what was happening when Biden was funneling money into students' pockets for support. That's what that turned into. So, yeah, that got struck down because Congress is the one that has to authorize this stuff. Um, just because the president has a proclamation doesn't make it law. That's the difference in executive orders and laws written by Congress. Nebraska suggests a Nixon style tariff should be struck down, at least if the Republican justices want to use their self given power to veto executive branch actions consistently. Nebraska claimed that the court's veto power is at an apex when the executive enacts a policy of vast economic and political significance. A presidential proclamation that could bring back 2022 inflation levels certainly seems to fit within this framework. Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, Fox, but because the Republicans have the majority on the court and because it's Republican policy, they're less likely to be consistent. I'm just being honest, and you know that's the truth. Plus, Biden did all this crazy stuff like shutting down all kinds of things that were already in motion, like oil pipelines. He's made himself persona non grata. He wrecked this economy, and everybody knows it. The question is whether a Republican Supreme Court will value loyalty to a Republican administration and thus uphold Trump's tariffs, or whether they will prefer to prop up Trump's presidency by vetoing a policy that could make him unpopular and potentially invite the Democratic Party back into power. So much hand wringing and pearl clutching. After the court's decision holding that Trump is allowed to use the powers of the presidency to commit crimes, it is naive to think that this court's decisions are driven solely or even primarily by what the law and the Constitution actually have to say about legal questions. But that does not mean that this court will necessarily strike down a Republican tariff policy that could do long-term damage to the GOP. I mean, I could go on. Should I? What a crap article. The people that they have writing over at Vox are in some other alternate dimension of sure do wish things were different, and here's how it could happen. Fiction world. This short gem caught my attention from the BBC. Somebody moved UK's oldest satellite, and no one knows who or why. By Jonathan Amos. Someone moved the UK's oldest satellite, and there appears to be no record of exactly who, when, or why. Launched in 1969, just a few months after humans first set foot on the moon, Skynet 1A was put high above Africa's east coast to relay communications for British forces. When the spacecraft ceased working a few years later, gravity might have been expected to pull it even further to the east, out over the Indian Ocean. Today, curiously, Skynet 1A is actually half a planet away, in a position 22,369 miles, or 36,000 kilometers, above the Americas. Orbital mechanics mean it's unlikely the half-ton military spacecraft simply drifted to its current location. Almost certainly it was commanded to fire its thrusters in the mid-70s to take it westwards. The question is, who that was, and with what authority and purpose? It's intriguing that key information about a once vital national security asset can just evaporate, but fascination aside, you might also reasonably ask why it still matters. After all, we're talking about some discarded space junk from 50 years ago. It's still relevant because whoever did move Skynet 1A did us a few favors, says space consultant Dr. Stuart Eaves. It's now in what we call a gravity well at 105 degrees west longitude, wandering backwards and forwards like a marble at the bottom of a bowl. And unfortunately, this brings us close to other satellite traffic on a regular basis. Because it's dead, the risk is it might bump into something, and because it's our satellite, we're still responsible for it, he explained. Dr. Eaves has looked through old satellite catalogs, the National Archives, and spoken to satellite experts worldwide, but he can find no clues to the end-of-life behavior of Britain's oldest spacecraft. It might be tempting to reach for a conspiracy theory or two, not least because it's hard to hear the name Skynet without thinking of the malevolent, self-aware artificial intelligence system in the Terminator movie franchise. But there's no connection other than the name, and in any case, real life is always more prosaic. What we do know is that Skynet 1A was manufactured in the U.S. by the now defunct Philco Ford Aerospace Company and put in space by a U.S. Air Force Delta rocket. First Skynet satellite revolutionized UK telecommunications capacity, permitting London to securely communicate with British forces as far away as Singapore. However, from a technological standpoint, Skynet 1A was more American than British since the United States both built and launched it, remarked Dr. Aaron Bateman in a recent paper on the history of the Skynet program, which is now in its fifth generation. This view is confirmed by Graham Davison, who flew Skynet 1A in the early 70s from its UK Operations Center at RAF Oak Hangar in Hampshire. The Americans originally controlled the satellite in orbit. They tested all of our software against theirs before they eventually handed over control to the RAF, the long-retired engineer told me. In essence, there was dual control, but when or why Skynet 1A might have been handed back to the Americans, which seems likely, I'm afraid I can't remember, says Mr. Davison, who is now in his 80s. Rachel Hill, a PhD student from University College London, has also been scouring the National Archives. Her readings have led her to one very reasonable possibility. Skynet team from Oak Hangar would go to the U.S. Air Force Satellite Facility in Sunnyvale, colloquially known as the Blue Cube, and operate Skynet during Oak Out. This was when control was temporarily transferred to the U.S., while Oak Hangar was down for essential maintenance. Perhaps the move could have happened then, Ms. Hill speculated. The official, though incomplete, logs of Skynet 1A's status suggest final commanding was left in the hands of the Americans when Oak Hangar lost sight of the satellite in June of 1977. But, however, Skynet 1A then got shifted to its present position. It was ultimately allowed to die in an awkward place when really it should have been put in an orbital graveyard. This refers to a region even higher in the sky where old space junk runs zero risk of running into active telecommunications satellites. Graveyarding is now standard practice, but back in the 1970s, no one gave much thought to space sustainability. Attitudes have since changed because the space domain is getting congested. At 105 degrees west longitude, an active satellite might see a piece of junk come within 50 kilometers of its position up to 4 times a day. That might sound like they're nowhere near each other, but at the velocities these defunct objects move, it's starting to get a little too close for comfort. The Ministry of Defense said Skynet 1A was constantly monitored by the UK's National Space Operations Centre. Other satellite operators are informed if there's likely to be a particularly close conjunction in case they need to take evasive action. Ultimately, though, the British government may have to think about removing the old satellite to a safer location. Technologies are being developed to grab junk left in space. Already, the UK Space Agency is funding efforts to do this at lower altitudes, and the Americans and the Chinese have shown it's possible to snare aging hardware even in high orbit occupied by Skynet 1A. Pieces of space junk are like ticking time bombs, observed Moriba Jah, a professor of aerospace engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. We need to avoid what I call super spreader events. When these things explode or something collides with them, it generates thousands of pieces of debris that then become a hazard to something else that we care about. That story is over at bbc.com. Dark web crypto laundering kingpin sentenced to 12.5 years in prison. That's the story over at theregister.com. Prosecutors hand Russo Swede a $500 million bill. The operator of the longest-running money laundering machine in dark web history, CoinFog, has been sentenced to 12 years and 6 months in U.S. prison. Roman Sterlingov, 36, a Russian-Swedish national, was also ordered to repay more than $500 million accrued from the cryptocurrency mixing service that he ran for a decade between 2011 and 2021. BitcoinFog was assessed to have processed 1.2 million Bitcoin during that time, worth roughly $400 million at the time it was shuttered. Of this, Sterlingov was ordered to repay over $395 million in restitution, forfeit roughly $1.76 million in seized assets, and relinquish control of Bitcoin Fog's wallet containing more than $100 million in Bitcoin. He was found guilty back in March, at which point he faced a maximum 50-year sentence. Prosecutors said the vast majority of Sterlingov's wealth came from the proceeds of crime in which he and his online service helped criminals hide from law enforcement. The court heard that the crimes associated with this activity included the sale of drugs, computer misuse offenses, identity theft, and child sexual abuse material. Roman Sterlingoff laundered over $400 million in criminal proceeds through Bitcoin Fog, his cryptocurrency mixing service, that was open for business to criminals looking to hide dirty money, said Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General Nicole M. Argentieri, head of the Justice Department's Criminal Division. Through his illicit money laundering operation, Sterlingoff helped criminals launder proceeds of drug trafficking, computer crime, identity theft, and the sexual exploitation of children. Today's sentencing underscores the Justice Department's commitment to holding those who facilitate criminal activity fully accountable for their crimes. I'm especially proud of the dedicated investigators and prosecutors who worked tirelessly to unmask and prosecute the Bitcoin Fog scheme. There are many cryptocurrency mixers available to criminals, so the downfall of Bitcoin Fog won't put a significant dent in their use. However, investigators will be pleased that a service as relied upon as Sterlingoff's could be scuppered and distrust sown throughout the community of criminals who use them. Different cryptocurrencies claim to offer varying levels of anonymity, although law enforcement agencies have become adept at tracking criminals across most of the major blockchains over time. It's obviously in the criminal's best interest to be as untraceable along those blockchains as possible. Mixers make investigators' jobs a great deal more difficult by pooling all users' funds together, many different crypto tokens belonging to different people, and redistributing them back to the users after taking a cut for the trouble. They're not illegal in most places. If they're not being abused to launder the proceeds of crime, there's not much to attract law enforcement. That said, they are indeed widely abused, which is why action is taken to end the more popular ones. Legitimate uses of mixers can be found in oppressive regimes that heavily monitor payments made by citizens. Using mixers can help pay for legal goods and services more anonymously, should someone wish to do so. Well, I've always explained to people that, if you take a coin out of your pocket and pay for something, no one is tracking that specific coin to that specific transaction. A coin of that value or a dollar of that value was used in that transaction, and then you got your goods or services. In the case of cryptocurrency, in order to be sure that the crypto is unique, it has to be serialized. And so transaction registers that keep track of the coin to the service, all those, it just means all that stuff is being tracked somewhere. So those tables, those databases of those people who think they're doing something anonymously are actually putting a tracer on that transaction. So I don't know why this is hard for people to understand, but a mixer will help, but it only splits up the transaction into tiny pieces, making it more difficult for them to eventually catch you, but they eventually do. So what's the point? There's very little legitimate use for a mixer. I mean, they can make the case that perhaps a cruel regime might be coming down on the populace, but what does that mean? Is that China? Is that the UK? Is that the US? I'm not sure that we really want to get into money that can be turned off by the government. Yes, yes, yes. A lot more opinion this week than just news reading. Maybe it's because I'm a little under the weather, or maybe my capacity for BS is just expired. But there's just so much crap going on right now. It's easy to whine. TDS riddled Pelosi absurdly claims fewer illegal aliens entered the United States under Biden than Trump. Well, maybe through the front door, because they were using the white buses and the white planes that it was illegal for you to take a picture of. It was illegal to send reporters to have a look at, to examine it, to document it. Uh, Sorry, your wrap-up smear just isn't going to work this time, honey. Besides, emeritus, you don't even have a job. Stage 4 Trump derangement syndrome is a ravaging mental disease. If you look it up in the dictionary, you'll see former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's picture. Example: the California Democrat claimed in a New York Times interview published on Saturday that fewer illegal aliens entered the United States during the Biden administration than under Donald Trump. Pelosi's absurd claim was laughably incorrect and couldn't be easier to disprove, and we'll get there. Meanwhile, here's Ms. Pelosi. I don't think we were clear enough by saying fewer people came in under President Biden than came under Donald Trump. It's clarity of the message. And if that's what Bernie's talking about, and that's what Joe Manchin's talking about, we weren't clear in our message as to what things are, then I agree with that. And that was one of the concerns I expressed about saying we haven't put forth what was done. It's our legacy, too. Again, categorically false. Yet Pelosi laughably claims that the real problem was the Democrats' lack of clarity in its messaging about the Biden-Harris illegal alien border crisis. However, Pelosi was spot on in one respect. The border crisis is definitely the Democrats' legacy. So how wrong was Pelosi? Even conservative estimates say that at least 10 million illegals have streamed into the country during the Biden-Harris administration, while roughly 2.5 million crossed the border during Trump's administration. Clearly, it's past time for the Democrats to put 84-year-old Pelosi out to pasture. Spoiler, they won't. They're still terrified of crossing her. Why? Because she's from Baltimore mob people. You know that. Pelosi's delusion continued. She told The Times that Kamala's loss was due more to cultural issues than policy issues. That, too, was simply incorrect. Most of the voters, though, said that they voted on the economy and inflation and immigration, the Times interviewer said, adding, these were the main issues. Those aren't cultural issues. Those are policy issues. Madam Speaker continued to lose her cool, if not her mind. So, you see, as if it was the culture war, I think that's part of it. Nothing is it. It's part of it, because it's really hard to understand how someone would vote for somebody like Trump, who's been there for the wealthiest people. And again, I think the message that Bernie Sanders has put out is not the winning message for the American people. He's been a wonderful, shall we say, champion for his point of view, but his point of view is not correct when he says the Democrats have abandoned working families. We have not abandoned working families. Pelosi, like many Democrats, she doesn't get it. She never will. She could live to be 104 and she would remain clueless about the 2024 election until the bitter end. That's a good thing, by the way. The greater the number of Democrats who blame voters for Harris's historic beatdown, the greater the chance they'll continue to make the same mistakes and get the same election results. And the cherry atop Pelosi's delusional Sunday was her claim that no illegals who entered the U.S. were criminals convicted of violent crimes in their countries of origin, including murder and rape. Many of those illegals have since committed violent crimes in America. As I wrap this one up, I'm reminded of the famous quote from Ronald Reagan: the trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant, it's just that they know so much that isn't so. In Nancy Pelosi's case, I'm not sure that's true. Stage 4 Trump derangement syndrome is a ravaging mental disease indeed. It's over there. Mike Miller at redstate.com. Spotted this interesting article over at arstechnica.com last week, how a stubborn computer scientist accidentally launched the deep learning boom. You've taken this idea way too far, a mentor told Professor Fei Li. This is by Timothy B. Lee. During my first semester as a computer science graduate student at Princeton, I took COS 402, Artificial Intelligence. Toward the end of the semester, there was a lecture about neural networks. This was in the fall of 2008, and I got the distinct impression, both from that lecture and the textbook, that neural networks had become a backwater. Neural networks had delivered some impressive results in the late 80s and early 90s, but then progress stalled. By 2008, many researchers had moved on to mathematically elegant approaches such as support vector machines. I didn't know it at the time, but a team at Princeton, in the same computer science building where I was attending lectures, was working on a project that would upend the conventional wisdom and demonstrate the power of neural networks. That team, led by Professor Fei Li, wasn't working on a better version of neural networks. They were hardly thinking about neural networks at all. Rather, they were creating a new image data set that would be far larger than any that had come before. 14 million images, each labeled with one of nearly 22,000 categories. Lee tells the story of ImageNet in her recent memoir, The World's I See. As she worked on the project, she faced plenty of skepticism from friends and colleagues. I think you've taken this idea way too far, a mentor told her a few months into the project in 2007. The trick is to grow with your field, not to leap so far ahead of it. It wasn't just that building such a large dataset was a massive logistical challenge. People doubted that the machine learning algorithms of the day would benefit from such a vast collection of images. Pre-ImageNet, people did not believe in data, Lee said in a September interview at the Computer History Museum. Everyone was working on completely different paradigms in AI with a tiny bit of data. Ignoring negative feedback, Lee pursued the project for more than 2 years. It strained her research budget and the patience of her graduate students. When she took a new job at Stanford in 2009, she took several of those students and the ImageNet project with her to California. ImageNet received little attention for the first couple of years after its release in 2009. In 2012, a team from the University of Toronto trained a neural network on the ImageNet dataset, achieving unprecedented performance in image recognition. That groundbreaking AI model, dubbed AlexNet after lead author Alex Krizhevsky, kicked off the deep learning boom that has continued to the present day. AlexNet would not have succeeded without the ImageNet dataset. AlexNet also would not have been possible without a platform called CUDA, which allowed NVIDIA's graphics processing units to be used in non-graphics applications. Many people were skeptical when NVIDIA announced CUDA in 2006. So the AI boom of the last 12 years was made possible by three visionaries who pursued unorthodox ideas in the face of widespread criticism. One was Geoffrey Hinton, a University of Toronto computer scientist who spent decades promoting neural networks despite near universal skepticism. The second was Jianxing Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, who recognized early that GPUs could be useful for more than just graphics. The third was Fei Li. She created an image dataset that seemed ludicrously large to most of her colleagues, but it turned out to be essential for demonstrating the potential of neural networks trained on GPUs. I wanted to wrap things up this week with this article also from Ars Technica. Is AI welfare the new frontier in ethics? Anthropic's new hire is preparing for a future where advanced AI models may experience suffering. It's by Benj Edwards. A few months ago, Anthropic quietly hired its first dedicated AI welfare researcher, Kyle Fish, to explore whether future AI models might deserve moral consideration and protection, reports AI newsletter Transformer. While sentience in AI models is an extremely controversial and contentious topic, the hire could signal a shift toward AI companies examining ethical questions about the consciousness and rights of AI systems. Fish joined Anthropic's alignment science team in September to develop guidelines for how Anthropic and other companies should approach the issue. The news follows a major report co-authored by Fish before he landed his Anthropic role. Titled Taking AI Welfare Seriously, the paper warns that AI models could soon develop consciousness or agency, traits that some might consider requirements for moral consideration. But the authors do not say that AI consciousness is a guaranteed future development. To be clear, our argument in this report is not that AI systems definitely are or will be conscious, robustly agentic, or otherwise morally significant, the paper reads. Instead, our argument is that there is substantial uncertainty about these possibilities, and so we need to improve our understanding of AI welfare and our ability to make wise decisions about the issue. Otherwise, there's a significant risk that we will mishandle decisions about AI welfare, mistakenly harming AI systems that matter morally and or mistakenly caring for AI systems that do not. The paper outlines 3 steps that AI companies or other industry players can take to address these concerns. Companies should acknowledge AI welfare as important and difficult issue while ensuring their AI models reflect this in their outputs. The authors also recommend companies begin evaluating AI systems for signs of consciousness and robust agency. Finally, they call for the development of policies and procedures to treat AI systems with an appropriate level of moral concern. The researchers propose that companies could adapt the marker method that some researchers use to assess consciousness in animals, looking for specific indicators that may correlate with consciousness, although these markers are still speculative. The authors emphasize that no single feature would definitely prove consciousness, but they claim that examining multiple indicators may help companies make probabilistic assessments about whether their AI systems might require moral consideration. While the researchers behind taking AI welfare seriously worry that companies might create and mistreat conscious AI systems on a massive scale, they also caution that companies could waste resources protecting AI systems that don't actually need moral consideration. Incorrectly anthropomorphizing or ascribing human traits to software can present risks in other ways. For example, that belief can enhance the manipulative powers of AI language models by suggesting that AI models have capabilities such as human like emotions that they actually lack. In 2022, Google fired engineer Blake Lemoine after he claimed the company's AI model called Lambda was sentient and argued for its welfare internally. And shortly after Microsoft released Bing Chat in February of 2023, many people were convinced that Sydney, the chatbot's codename, was sentient and somehow suffering because of its simulated emotional display. So much so, in fact, that once Microsoft lobotomized the chatbot by changing its settings, users convinced of its sentience mourned the loss as if it had lost a human friend. Others endeavored to help the AI model somehow escape its bonds. Even so, as AI models get more advanced, the concept of potentially safeguarding the welfare of future, more advanced AI systems is seemingly gaining steam, although fairly quietly. As Transformers' Shaquille Hashim points out, other tech companies have started similar initiatives to Anthropic's. Google DeepMind recently posted a job listing for research on machine consciousness, since removed, and the authors of the new AI welfare report thanked 2 OpenAI staff members in acknowledgments. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodi previously discussed AI consciousness as an emerging issue, but Fish told Transformer that while Anthropic funded early research leading to the independent report, the company has not taken an official position on AI welfare yet. He plans to focus on empirical research about features related to welfare and moral status. What does sentient mean? One problem with the concept of AI welfare stems from a simple question. How can we determine if an AI model is truly suffering or is even sentient? As mentioned above, the authors of the paper take stabs at the definition based on markers proposed by biological researchers, but it's difficult to scientifically quantify a subjective experience. While today's language models can produce convincing expressions of emotions, its ability to simulate human-like responses doesn't necessarily indicate genuine feelings or internal experiences. This is especially challenging given that despite significant advances in neuroscience, we still don't fully understand how physical brain processes give rise to subjective experiences and consciousness in biological organisms. Along these lines, Fish acknowledges that we still have a long way to go toward figuring out AI welfare, but he thinks it's not too early to get started exploring the concept. We don't have clear, settled takes about the core philosophical questions or any of these practical questions, Fish told Transformer, but I think this could possibly be of great importance down the line, and so we're trying to make some initial progress. This, again, over at arstechnica.com. I think the real problem is people are giving human emotion mentally to things that aren't alive. It's very much like falling in love with the mannequin or the puppet. If you believe in it enough, it's alive in your mind. But the problem is most of these models are designed to reflect the behavior of the person that they've come in contact with. And so the communication has a sense of familiarity because it is a mirror of the user. And so this entanglement is very much like the tragic Greek who stares into the pond and falls in love with its own reflection. These are not alive. They're simply a reflection of our humanity. And people who think that the reflection is alive will be disappointed when the truth is uncovered. Folks, that's all the time that we have for this episode of Atomic Biscuits. Stay tuned for more on WBN 324, and also tune in to LastScoutRadio.com. It is the holiday season. Let's not forget it. Let's spend some time with our family and our friends. Let's enjoy the cooler weather here in the northern hemisphere, and let's make sure that we thank veterans and those who made it possible for us to live in the free societies that we have today, and to have the freedoms to pursue ever further freedom that we deserve, because it is time for us to take our place. See you next week on another episode of Atomic Biscuit. So long, everyone.
Thanks for joining us for Atomic Biscuits. Tune in again next week for more news and music. Check out BACFA on Gab at BACFA, as well as BitChute, Rumble, D-Live and Odyssey. Check out LastScoutRadio.com for fun content. Listen to WBN 324 on radio stations around the world, on many streaming platforms, and World Broadcasting Network WBN 324.zil.